I think all gardeners who grow their seedlings inevitably face the problem of leggy seedlings. It may seem to us that we just need to keep growing them patiently until the warmer days, and when the stretched seedlings are taken outside, the problem will disappear on its own because there's a lot of sun outside and everything will immediately get better. But this is not the case. Such seedlings, being moved under open sunlight in the spring, can immediately be burned, shrink, and die. First of all, it is not so much that the leaves and the tops of the seedlings are going to suffer from direct sunlight, but the fragile, whitish, pigment-free, stretched stems are going to suffer. They are immediately burned by ultraviolet light, wrinkled and dried out, leading to the death of all the seedlings. Well, what do you do if this happens? Do you throw everything out and plant everything all over again and go buy greenhouse-ready garden center seedlings? Planting everything anew in May is actually a good idea, of course. Seedlings planted in May are much stronger and they do not stretch out too much. They do not become leggy. And if they sprout in the open ground, then they're not afraid of sunlight at all. But time is a very important factor. And seedlings planted in March or the end of February are still 2 to 3 times larger than the ones planted in May, which means that they will bloom and bear fruit faster. But before I share my experiences of how to save such seedlings, let's take a look at why this happens. When we plant seeds for seedlings in late winter or early spring, daylight hours are still quite short and heating is still on in our houses. We're so eager to see the greenery after long winter months, so we water our seedlings abundantly and often use good quality potting soil for growing them, which are often filled with slow-release fertilizers. All of this, abundant watering, excess nitrogen and phosphorus, high temperatures, and lack of sunlight or artificial light leads to the launch of such biological mechanisms such as tropisms. Tropisms can be different. For example, phototropism are when seedlings stretch towards a light source. Geotropism is the movement of plants in response to the direction of gravity, for example, in the case of uneven placement of pots and trays in relation to the ground. Hydrotropism, which is the stretching towards a moisture source, and so on. When under the influence of phytohormones, plant cells begin to stretch, resulting in plants growing on thin, fragile, and whitish legs. This is why they're called leggy seedlings. Understanding this, we must take these factors into account, and back in March or February, at the very beginning of our attempts to grow the seedlings, we must take measures to avoid this. So, step 1. You need to start growing seeds in cool rooms with a temperature no higher than 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. Most of even the most heat-loving seeds will germinate perfectly at these temperatures. And the most heat-loving seedlings can always be sent to a cooler room after germination. Step 2. Use additional lighting. Extending daylight hours with ultraviolet lamps increases the intensity of photosynthesis and thus the production of protective pigments, thereby helping plants quickly adapt to direct sunlight when moved outdoors. Step 3. Avoid overwatering. Excess moisture in conditions of 24-hour high temperatures will inevitably lead to the seedlings stretching. It makes sense to dry the soil in the container with seedlings in between watering. Step 4. Avoid all kinds of synthetic fertilizers. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus in particular contribute to the stretching of cells with a low concentration of chloroplasts, which ultimately leads to the appearance of whitish, leggy stems. Use simple garden soil and do not buy expensive mixtures containing slow-release fertilizers for these purposes. But oftentimes, all these measures do not allow you to completely avoid stretching, since growing seedlings in the early spring at home is not a natural process. And even experienced gardeners will not be able to avoid these problems. I will tell you, though, that this is a fixable matter, and you should not despair or throw away the seedlings or replant them or run to the store to buy more. The most important thing now is to transplant such seedlings into open ground, and this is what I'm going to continue to do so that such seedlings do not die. Step 5. Thinning. I remove all the very weak shoots and reduce their number in areas where they have sprouted very densely. This improves air exchange and stimulates the strengthening of the stems. Step 6. Pricking out seedlings. Almost all plants grown indoors will benefit from being planted more spaciously. Even after thinning, you cannot just throw away every weak seedling, but make sure to give them a chance to get stronger and simply plant them in another container. So soon after the first set of leaves on the seedlings have fully opened and the next set of true leaves are starting to show, I carefully lift the seedlings out of the soil that are growing and place them in freshly filled trays or small pots. The advantage of this is that while the seedlings are still very small, the roots will not stretch out too far or get tangled up with each other, which means that they'll be less likely to be damaged. This does need to be done carefully. I just pull the seedlings out by the leaves, digging them up a little with a spoon. It's surprisingly easy, and the seedlings take root very well after transplantation, very quickly as well. The leggy stems can be buried in the soil completely to the first pair of leaves, preventing further elongation. Step 7, deepening. If, despite all efforts, the seedlings still continue to stretch and it is not yet time to plant them in open ground, as the plants are still in the pots and containers waiting for the danger of the last spring frost to be over, I add soil to cover and protect the weak stems from the sun's rays to the first pair of leaves. By doing this, you can save even seedlings that have been damaged by the sun. Many plants, such as tomatoes, eggplants, basil, form lateral roots on the stems, and this helps them grow faster. This also works with other crops, beets, lettuce, cucumbers, and so on, with almost all vegetables and all flower seedlings. If it's finally time to plant them in the open ground, I always deepen all the seedlings to the first pair of leaves, and if they are still in a container and there's no way to add soil, then I bend them down to the soil surface and cover them with soil from above, also to the first pair of leaves. Step 8, hardening. When the plants have already been planted in the open ground, or if they're still in containers and you're taking them outside during the day, I take measures to protect the plants from direct sunlight. And this is very important since the plants have been grown indoors and they have not yet developed the necessary pigments and protection from ultraviolet radiation. It is best to harden the seedlings in diffused sunlight. For example, in places shaded by trees or shrubs. But in early spring, the trees are still bare, and unfortunately, there aren't that many places in the garden. And therefore, I use a plastic bag to cover the seedlings, whether they are still in a container or planted in the open ground. Polyethylene film creates a greenhouse effect. It retains moisture, protects from excessive ultraviolet radiation, protects from strong winds, spring frost, and it gives the seedlings the opportunity to get stronger and get used to the external environment. In some cases, for example, for tall tomato seedlings or particularly delicate flowers, I use inverted glass jars. The film and jars can be opened or taken off periodically in cloudy, quiet, or rainy weather, since ultraviolet radiation still penetrates through the clouds. And then you can remove it completely once the seedlings start to noticeably grow. And finally, one more piece of advice. I cover especially important and valuable seedlings using moss. Used moss from orchid pots or purchased dried moss is an ideal means for saving stretched seedlings. Moss will protect fragile stems from sunlight and improve aeration and soil microbiota. Mosses themselves, when decomposing, are not a big source of any particularly important nutrients, but the most important thing is that mosses are home to a large number of microorganisms and carry spores of various soil bacteria. So when these mosses are added to the soil, the microbiota is significantly improved, and therefore nitrogen fixation and plant growth is accelerated. In general, be sure to try it for yourself and let me know in the comment section. In any case, stretched seedlings planted yearly during the growing season require special attention and more patient handling, but ultimately they will begin to bloom and bear fruit quicker as compared to seedlings planted in May in the open ground. And my work, as a rule, always pays off with interest. So if you'd enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe.